Beautiful. Thank you, Cantor. That's good. I'd say it has been a beautiful service to this point. The Torah chanting, I would say, Brenda, was really wonderful. And I don't know if anyone was paying attention, though, to the words that were chanted. Right? Was anyone following along in the Hebrew or the English based on your understanding? Right? So, if you are to bring a large animal, right, you butcher it, you then cut it into smaller pieces so they all fit on the altar and that you're able to drain all of the blood out. And the blood, of course, gets splattered on the side of the altar. But with a small bird, right, you first pinch the head off, right, before you hang it upside down to pour the blood out of the side of the altar. And then you've got to make sure to pluck all of the feathers, right? Why does everyone seem shocked? This is what we've already heard this today. It was beautifully chanted. It was in the, right? You have to make sure the gizzard is torn out, and then you take the wings, you rip it, but you can't cut, not in half, right? In half is too much. That would be way too far, right? But just enough, and then you put it, and it's burned entirely up, and this is the olah. It's beautiful. It's good. Sorry? If I did with the melody, it would have been beautiful, right? Without the melody, it's thank you, Teresa. It's true. So I often tell our students as they're approaching a bar and bat mitzvah that you just heard this Torah chanted, our Torah chanted with the voice of our community, and there are probably 30 other congregations in Toronto, maybe more, reading the same portion also at this moment today. And not only in Toronto, right? People, if you were to count all of the Jewish communities in the world, there's maybe tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands that are reading and heard these words, which we just heard today. Not just this year, of course, was this Torah portion read, and not just on Shabbat, on Monday and Thursday. For thousands of years, at least 2,000 years, we have heard as a people these words chanted. And guess what? People ask questions about it. And people say, this is difficult, this is hard, what does this have to do with my life? Right? So if you're the one thinking that, you're not the only Jew to have asked that question. In fact, some really inspiring teachers have asked the same things and come up with great answers. So in the back section of the Plaut Chumash, you'll see of each parasha, there's a section which has different gleanings, different quotes. And some of those quotes, it takes our halakha, our laws, and in our portion today, in Vayikra, it's almost all stories and interpretations, midrashim, about how do we understand these texts. One of which that Rabbi Plau brings is actually a little bit of a longer story. So I'm going to tell the longer story on the section that Brenda chanted for us. On that section actually of the tearing the animal in half. Right? How have Jews dealt with this for thousands of years? So this is a story from the 600s, we think. Rabbi Yochanan taught that when the Second Temple stood, and Agrippus was the Council of Rome, he wanted to send a sacrifice to the temple. But it wasn't just any sacrifice. He wanted to make a significant contribution. He wanted to sponsor the day. Right, this is maybe a good fundraising thing that we should think of, right? He wanted to be the sponsor of all the sacrifices on that day in the temple. And so he arranged with the high priest, he arranged the donation, and made sure that no one else could sponsor on that day, because that day was going to be Agrippus' day. But, Rabbi Yochanan teaches, there was a man in Jerusalem who each day would go out and catch 4 turtle doves. vengeance, right? He would go out, he would catch these four turtle doves, and he would bring two to the priest to be sacrificed, and he would use two for his sustenance, right? Either as his food or to sell in the marketplace for other food to eat on that day. And it was in his thinking and his superstition that what ensured that he would have two more for the next day? The sacrifice, right? So he went to the high priest and said, please, I really need you to sacrifice these two turtle doves as a full burnt offering to God, because if you don't, I won't have food for tomorrow. Right? What do you think the high priest did? What do you think? You release the comment. No, that'd be clever. But the rabbi is clever, but not that clever. He's not as good. And so, what does he do? He sacrifices them. And guess who finds out? Agrippus, the donor, right? The donor Agrippus. He finds out that the high priest didn't follow the donor agreement, right? He didn't follow exactly. He finds out in a dream, of course, right? And he goes to the priest and says, what happened here? What went on? The high priest told him the story, and Agrippus said, oh, okay, that's fine. Rabbi Yochanan continues with another story. A story of a woman who came with a meal offering. The next words following what we chanted today is about the meal offering. And so the two he puts together in his explanation. And he says this woman came with just a handful of flour for the meal offering and walked up with all the other donors to the priest. And the prince looked at that flour in her hand and started laughing at her. And said, what is this? This is not enough to feed you, let alone feed me, right? And so, Rabbi Yochanan teaches, we learn the meaning of the book of Leviticus. We learn the meaning of these verses on sacrifice. And what does it mean? Why do we have these details on sacrifice? It's so that we always remember that it is okay to accept the gift of the poor before the gift of the rich. Why do we have these teachings in Leviticus? To teach us what may be an insignificant gift from us is someone else's soul. And we must do whatever we can in Judaism to preserve the soul. If you thought we were talking about animal sacrifice, maybe, right? But when the rabbis and teachers have been reading these texts for thousands of years, they've been looking for meaning behind the text, meaning inside the text, about power, about tzedakah, and about how we should live our lives. There's much to talk about today about power dynamics and power relationships. One conversation that I've seen play out in the United States via Facebook has been about the walkout of students that happened earlier this week as a protest to the Parkdale shooting in Florida, which killed 15 students and 2 adults. Many students across America walked out of their classrooms for 17 minutes. This, of course, was against the policies of their institutions. And teachers were put into interesting situations, interesting predicaments. right? So many of my friends in the States are now teaching, some in Michigan, some in New Jersey, in other states as well. And their administrations gave them different rules about how they should react to the walkout. So, in one of my friends posted and discussed how much she wanted to walk out with her students and stand in support, as many teachers did, but was told by her administration, you must stay in your classroom. That is what you are being paid for, and we are not here to make political statements. You need to stay where you are, and she did. Other teachers were told they must give instructions to their students, such as, you may not take your coats with you. Right? You must go, if you are leaving, you must go straight out, come for 17 minutes, not go to your locker, not to stop anywhere else, and then come back in, even in the frozen weather that we've been having, even amidst the nor'easter in New Jersey, you must go out without your coat. And there are other stories surfacing. There's a report coming out of Arkansas that a school decided to use corporal punishment on the students who walked out. One of the students who walked out of that school reported, the punishment was not dealt with malice or cruelty. In fact, I have the utmost respect for all the adults involved. They were merely doing their job as the school board and school policy dictated. I believe that corporal punishment has no place in schools, even if it wasn't painful to me. The idea that violence should be used against someone who was protesting violence as a means to discipline them is appalling. My friends were not the high priests in their schools and their work environments, but all of them had a role to play when it came to the power dynamics. Each one of those administrators and teachers in Arkansas had a role to play when it came to the power dynamics. Do they make that exception? Do they say that these rules are for certain times, but when it comes to saving lives, when it comes to standing for what we believe in, when it comes to our values, then it is okay to take that donation, to move around those rules just a little bit for this purpose, for the sake of life. The whole book of Leviticus is about holiness and sacrifice, or sacrifices in some way. I think it's interesting to think in our modern lexicon, what does the word sacrifice mean? And then what does it mean in Hebrew? What is the meaning of korban? Right? So what is a sacrifice, right? What is the root? What is the Latin for sacrifice, Barbara? Right, sanctity, like sakra, right? It's to make something sacred, and that's literally what is done in our Torah. And what does it mean in our common day parlance? Say, I made a sacrifice, right? What is that? To give up, right? A sacrifice means to give up something, which in the temple days it was actually something of worth, right? That grain in that woman's hand was something of deep worth to her. And normally we think of sacrifices, we think about what are we giving up, right? When you think of the word korban, or when we translate karov, Ido, what does karov mean? Close, right? A korban, the Hebrew word korban, is an idea of something which brings you close, something which brings you close to God. Right? It's not the giving up, it's the bringing close. And so as we read the words of Leviticus today, and those ancient ways that our people had to bring themselves close to God, we also look through the text through our modern lens. and see how do these texts, how do they bring us closer? Right? In the case that Rabbi Yochanan brings of the woman with her flower in her hand, the question for the priest is, what brings that priest closer to God? The question for the teachers and for the administrators, I would say, and the question for each of us as we live our lives, is about not the rule, but what brings us close to God. For some of us, that involves coming here on our Saturdays, and for many of us, it includes the way that we live our lives, the way that we follow rules, the way that we understand power, and the way that we use our understandings to bring about more wholeness, more nefesh, more soul, and more peace. Shabbat Shalom.